When everything seems to be against you, remember that an airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. Henry Ford. Today we're covering cross-country flight planning. Here's the battle plan. We'll start with a scenario. You have the opportunity for a flight recap. We'll get into cross-country flight planning, and then we'll do a quiz and assign some homework. So here's a scenario. Watch it, and then think about what you would do in this situation, and I'll talk about it towards the end. So starting off, just to set you up, we are on the 45 for left downwind, and we're turning right to get onto the downwind leg right now. What do you think about that mountain right there at 12 o'clock? Okay, what leg are we about to turn to? That's the base leg, all right. And now we are face to face with a mountain. Now what leg are we turning to? Final, right. Okay, here we've overshot. This is exactly the point where you are at greatest risk of entering a spin. And it looks like we're pretty high and pretty fast. What would the right thing to do be? This pilot's just gonna go for it, full send. Best thing to do would be go around. That runway's coming up pretty quick. Now we're in ground effect, trying to bleed off that airspeed. We're already past the halfway mark in the runway. Full brakes. Let's see it from a different angle now. You see we're coming in at a very steep angle. Not a stabilized approach at all. Best thing to do here would be to go around and then try to do a more stabilized approach on downwind, base, and final. See, we're in ground effect for almost the entire length of the runway. We barely get stopped in time. All right, cool. So take a minute now to talk about your most recent flight. What went well? What could have gone better? What did you learn? What was the purpose? And what was your favorite part of the flight? When you're ready, let's move on. All right, today we're covering cross-country flight planning. Let's start with magnetic course versus true course. So remember that the planet is a sphere and our map is a rectangle. When we are talking about the map, we have true north, what we call true north, and let's say it's somewhere over here on the planet. Magnetic north, as we have mentioned before, is not co-located with true north. There's actually an angular difference between true and magnetic north. So the magnetic north pole of the planet is not at the same place as our true north. So we have to account for that difference. We can see it on the map, and if we see western variation, we're going to add it. If we see eastern variation, we subtract it. So east is least, west is best. So here, true north is in line with these grid lines here. And if we look at our VOR stations or our VOR rings, they actually tell us like what north would be, or they're more corresponding with magnetic north. And so this is north according to the magnetic heading, and then true north would be, you know, this angle or this here. And so this right here, this line, this isogonic line, tells us the angle that we need to add or subtract to account for the variation between true north and magnetic north. Here it's 15 degrees, 30 minutes east. So do we add or subtract eastern variation? East is least, we subtract. We also have to account for the wind anytime we're making our flight plan. So we need to add right wind and subtract left wind. So if we think of our aircraft here in the center of our wind E6B, anytime we've got wind coming from the right, we need to crab to the right to account for that wind. If it's coming from our left, we need to crab to the left and subtract that wind variation. I'm going to post a video on how to use a wind side of the E6B later on. If you're asked for a compass heading, your magnetic heading is converted by adding or subtracting deviation. Now, deviation can be caused by things inside the aircraft messing with your compass, either magnetic or electrical components. So these are usually indicated on a compass correction card mounted on your compass, and it looks something like this chart here. So they'll say, if you want to fly north, steer 0. If you want to fly a heading of 030, you need to steer to a heading of 028. There's a 2-degree difference between what the compass is telling you and what you actually need to fly. So keep that in mind. So again, this is needed due to metal, motors, and other instruments that affect the compass, and they usually tell you, what headings to fly every 30 degrees. Some of the questions on the exam are going to ask you to calculate your time and route. Just remember to use the right units. Take a look at your scale, make sure you're using the right scale. Our plotters have different scales for different charts, so make sure you're doing the right one. Remember that, for velocity, it's distance over time. And then remember your units, nautical miles versus statute miles, and minutes versus hours. Here's our wind triangle. If we are flying an aircraft, and let's say we want to get from point A to point B, this is our true heading and airspeed. So what our nose is pointed at, and the airspeed we're reading off the airspeed indicator. Our wind is going to push us off course. So this is our wind direction and velocity. And so our true course and ground speed will be this part of the triangle here. So we want to fly this line, but we're actually flying this line because of the wind pushing us off course. Here's another way to look at it. So label the wind direction and velocity, the true heading and airspeed, and true course and ground speed. So this is what our nose is pointed at and what we want to fly. This is our wind, and this is what we're actually flying. So true heading and airspeed, wind direction and velocity, and the true course and ground speed. You might have to convert time zone. You might have to correct for your time zone variation. So remember that it's 1 hour difference between each time zone. There is a chart that we can use to help us with that. Basically, in the U.S., we use 4, 5, 6, 7 for UTC, and in the winter, it's 5, 6, 7, 8. So to convert from Eastern Standard Time, we're going to add 5 hours, and then if we want to convert from Pacific Daylight Time, add 7 hours, and just review the chart. It'll make it a lot easier. Let's talk about the fundamentals of flight. Excuse me. So what are the 4 basic maneuvers of flying? They are straight and level, turns, climbs, and descents. Everything else is a variation of these. Chandelles, lazy eights, barrel rolls, everything is a variation of these 4 maneuvers. So these are the 4 you want to nail before you move on to more interesting maneuvers. Let's talk about the rectangular course. This is meant to emulate the traffic pattern, but we're going to stay at the same altitude the entire time. A big part of the rectangular course is learning how to account for wind. So if you are, on this leg here, you're flying directly into the wind, and as you turn essentially from upwind to crosswind, you're going to have to account for this wind. Imagine the wind is really, really pushing you off course, so you're going to crab into the wind. And then when you turn from crosswind to downwind, you're going to make this turn here and then fly parallel to the wind. And then once you're on leg 3 or corner 3, you're going to make an exaggerated turn again and fly a crab into the wind to fly to leg number 4 or to corner number 4. S-turns across the road are similar. They also teach us how to perform maneuvers with reference to the ground and at the same time account for wind. So we enter on the downwind, have our wings levels across the road. We enter a very steep bank here on turn 1. We roll out of it, moderate bank, and then the shallowest bank here as you come level with the road again. And you want your wings level on once you cross the road. And because the wind is pushing us back towards the road, we're not going to have as steep of a bank. We're going to have a shallow bank here, going to come wings level again as we cross the road. Really, the best way to learn these is to go out and practice them with a CFI. So let's review. What are the 4 fundamental flight maneuvers? Straight and level flight, turns, climbs, and descents. Remember, everything else is based off of these 4. In flying the rectangular course, when would the aircraft be turned less than 90 degrees? I'll give you a second to think about it. All right, corners 1 and 4. Now talk me through S-turns across a road. I'll give you a minute here to think about it. All right, so we start on the downwind leg. We enter here. We have our wings levels across the road. We enter a steep bank. We roll out of it into a moderate bank, and then we are back at wings level across the road. Because the wind is pushing us towards the road, we're going to have a shallow bank here, moving into a more moderate bank, and then finally wings level again as we cross the road. All right, that about covers it for today. Take 5 minutes down to remember as much as you can, and then when you're ready, let's knock out our quiz. All right, let's hit it. What is the purpose of the elevator on an airplane? To control pitch. To get a complete weather briefing for the planned flight, the pilot should request a standard brief. To update a previous weather briefing, a pilot should request an abbreviated brief. You plan to phone a weather briefing facility for pre-flight weather information. You should do what? Identify yourself as a pilot. For aviation purposes, ceiling is defined as the height above the Earth's surface of the lowest broken or overcast layer or vertical visibility into an obscuration. What are the current conditions depicted for Chicago Midway Airport? First of all, let's make sure we're looking at the right one here, KMDW. And it's sky 700 feet overcast, visibility 1.5 miles, and rain. Which of the reporting stations have VFR weather? So first of all, let's take a look at our options. All these two share 2 different airports, and then the only difference between them is these 2. So I would look at either this airport or this airport to determine whether or not they have VFR weather. And in this case, it's KLAX. If the terrain elevation is 1,295 feet MSL, what is the height above ground level of the base of the ceiling? (505 feet AGL). How far will an aircraft travel in 2.5 minutes with a ground speed of 98 knots? Remember that knots are nautical miles per hour, so we can convert 2.5 minutes into hours by dividing them by 60 minutes in 1 hour, and then we get 4.08 nautical miles per hour. Which V-speed represents maximum flap extended speed? VFE. How long does the airworthiness of an aircraft remain valid? as long as the aircraft is maintained and operated as required by the federal aviation regulations. In flying the rectangular course, when would the aircraft be turned less than 90 degrees? Corners 1 and 4. Which statement relates to Bernoulli's principle? Air traveling faster over the curved upper surface of an airfoil causes lower pressure on the top surface. Who may perform preventative maintenance on an aircraft and approve it for return service? A private or commercial pilot. Which operation would be described as preventative maintenance? Servicing landing gear wheel bearings. When must a current pilot certificate be in the pilot's personal possession or readily accessible in the aircraft? Anytime when acting as PIC or as a required crew member. A third-class medical certificate is issued to a 36-year-old pilot on August 10th of this year. To exercise the privileges of a private pilot certificate, the medical certificate will be valid until midnight on August 31st, 5 years later. If a private pilot had a flight review on October 30th of this year, when is the next flight review required? October 31st, 2 years later. When converting from true course to magnetic heading, a pilot should add westerly variation and subtract left wind correction angle. What exception, if any, permits a private pilot to act as pilot in command of an aircraft carrying passengers who pay for the flight? If a donation is made to a charitable organization for the flight. The base and tops of the overcast layer reported by a pilot are 7,200 feet MSL and 8,900 feet MSL. So remember, we're looking for the overcast layer, and that's over here, OVC, not BKN. To best determine general forecast weather conditions covering a flight information region, the pilot should refer to Aviation Area Forecasts. An aircraft departs an airport in the Eastern Daylight Time Zone at 0945 EDT for a 2-hour flight to an airport located in the Central Daylight Time Zone. The landing should be at what coordinated universal time? (1545 Zulu). En route to First Flight Airport, your aircraft passes over Hampton Roads Airport at 1456 and then over Chesapeake Regional at 1501. At what time should your flight arrive at First Flight? Be sure to pause it here if you want more time. I'm going to go into it here in a second. So 1526. So first we want the distance between the first two airports. So 10 nautical miles between, First Flight, Hampton Roads over then to Chesapeake. So Hampton Roads is here and Chesapeake is here. So that's 10 miles. And we've traveled in 5 minutes. So that means 2 nautical miles per minute. Now we need the distance between the second and third points, which is, Chesapeake to First Flight. That's 50 nautical miles, roughly. So in 50 nautical miles, traveling at 2 nautical miles per minute is going to be 25 minutes. And so, doing some math, we come out to the correct time. To minimize side loads placed on the landing gear during touchdown, the pilot should keep the longitudinal axis of the aircraft parallel to the direction of its motion. While practicing S-turns, a consistently smaller half circle is made on one side of the road than the other, and this turn is not completed before crossing the road or reference line. This would most likely occur in turn 3, 4, 5 because the bank is increased too rapidly during the early part of the turn. Also, I'm going to add an R here, reference line. To correct the correct method of stating this altitude in MSL to ATC is 4,500. What is the outlook for the southern half of Indiana after 07 Zulu? It's VFR. Here's the southern half, VFR, Indiana. In the TAF for KMEM, what does SHRA stand for? Rain showers. In the TAF from KOKC, the FM group is forecast for the hours from 1600 Zulu to 2200 Zulu with the wind from 180 at 10 knots. All right, that about covers it. So if you have time, go take a look at aviation jobs, prepare a presentation for that. Start looking at those search and rescue briefs and start working on your flight plans, and keep reading your books and keep quizzing yourself. If you have questions, of course, please feel free to contact me, and then I would love to hear any feedback for you that you have for me. Here are my references as usual, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys next time. See ya.